But when you talk about this chapter in Mark, from verse 1 to everything we've covered so far, okay, now you can break the book down lots of ways. If you break it down to his ministry, all right, so he's been ministering to the Jews. Now then he ministers to the Gentiles, very short period, 2 places. And then you're going to see now he's going to go forward. You can break it down lots of ways. But there is one thing you cannot miss in the book of Mark. From the beginning of the book of Mark, it is, who is Jesus? Okay, now you're in Mark chapter 8. It is like the pinnacle. Mark chapter 8 is, who do you say that I am? It is that question. Okay, so I can't wait to get there, but we're not really going to get there today either. But that is such a huge point. Now, in this passage, it all builds towards that. I mean, if there is a passage in this book that you really should slow down on, it would be this one, and I've done it a little bit, but I would still tell you the same thing. There is a fly-by benefit in the book of Mark that you see a big picture if you just take a huge portion, because he writes it that way. I mean, he writes it, the whole book is so small compared to your others, and he gives you little bits, and struggling, Brother Mark, I said, we just need to study this book, Mark speed. Just like he wrote it, we need to study it that way. And I want to try to do that again this morning because I think there's something we miss if we don't. All that being said, I need to finish up last week. Last week we tried to look at verses 1 through 21. 1 through 21 in Mark chapter 8 deals with 3 different things. It's the feeding of the 4,000, which I didn't want to skip because so many other people do. In fact, you can go to many Christians and say, hey, I was studying about the feeding of the 4,000. And you know what they'll do? They'll correct you and say, don't you mean the 5,000? It is so rarely taught, people don't realize there was a feeding of the 4,000. So I didn't want to skip over it. But you have to look at the feeding of the 4,000. We had to look at the challenge of the Pharisees, which seems to come right after he does a miraculous thing. They're always there to say, did he really, or was it really, and they show up here to cause more doubt. And then there's a warning from Christ to his. Now, we're going to try to just wrap all that up, and we're going to do it quickly so that we can jump into what would be hot notes, because I will cry if they end up being cold notes next week. That being said, this is where we kind of left off, I think. Brother Ivy, we went through like 25 minutes of my personal counseling session. And then we tried to make a conclusion. That conclusion is, if we're going to look at the feeding of the 4,000, I think one of the great things to see there is what Jesus is dealing with is the real problem of hunger in humanity. It is not hunger for food. What he's really dealing with is man's hunger for more of him. And we get to see that here. And it's illustrated in a couple ways. You know, we have these people are out there for 3 days. For 3 days they go, not enough food, not enough water, they leave. It gets to the point that they care more about being and seeing with Jesus than they do about all of these list of other things. And that is what will happen if you have a real encounter with him. So we have this picture that shows us dealing with the real problem of man, this real hunger for man. We jump to Colossians chapter 1, tried to make this conclusion. That makes sense. If you study any of the Bible, that's going to make sense. Miss Lorraine, that makes sense because we were created by him, for him, and it's in him we're supposed to live. So apart from him, things don't work. Now, we try to fill that void with lots of things. We try to fill it with work, and we try to fill it with family, and all of which, by the way, are good things. God ordained work. God ordained the family. We try to fill it with lots of things. But nothing is meant to fill that outside of Christ himself. Okay. And so we spent some time trying to develop that picture. So that leads us to this question. What do you think happens when we, who are created by him, in him, and for him, feed ourselves daily on everything else but him? And that's the tendency. The tendency for us is to derive purpose or meaning or contentment or peace from lots of other things. Well, if I'm financially stable, my 401k, well, if I could just get this job, well, we try to fill up on everything but Christ. And he's the only one that can fill our soul. Now, I cut this down last week. I had the entire article, but I didn't bring it on purpose. And I've used this numerous times. I've had the pleasure, but Mark, I've had the pleasure to deal with young people for years. And one of the great challenges for young people, for old people, for all people, is pornography in this country. There was an article written by Naomi Wolf. It's an article, but really it's a review of a case study. It was published in the New Yorker magazine, which, you know, you're quoting the New Yorker magazine. There's actually some pretty good stuff that goes on in the New Yorker magazine. They'll publish people who disagree with them. Now, we're not talking New York Times, we're talking New Yorker magazine. It was published in 2008, and I just a little snippet, so I didn't read the whole article. She starts by making this statement, okay? Now, I'm going to read this, but I'm going to tie this to our problem, man's problem, hungering. Sexuality has become the wallpaper of our society. There's that opening, boom. Sexuality has become the wallpaper of our society. Now, wallpaper is what you see, meaning it's everywhere, it's accepted, it's glorified, it's lifted up. Now, if you don't believe that, then you need to drive and look at a billboard. It is everywhere. Now, if you take that and take the picture, Ms. Lorraine, and you say, okay, so if that was meant to be fulfilling, if that was meant to bring happiness, contentment, peace, joy, some kind of solution, then you would think in our society right now, sexuality would be at its peak, and people would be happy, and they would be glowing, and it would be the answer. But here's the result of the case study. If you think that it would bring satisfaction because it's now freed and people would be happy, the conclusion is never before has there been a higher dissatisfaction with sex in our society. She goes on and she compares it to the relationship with processed foods. This is good. If we develop an appetite to be fed by poor quality food, what happens is it takes more and more junk food to fill us up, until we get to the place that junk food is no longer satisfying at all. The same has happened in this picture with sexuality. It takes more and more junk. Why do you get more and more deviant? Why does it go further and further and further? Because that's what you have to do to get some change. But at the end, you get to the place where there's nothing there. Okay? We can't be filled by anything but Jesus. And anything we try to fill, to derive purpose or contentment or peace on, even if it's good, even if it's being responsible in job and growth and influence and savings and money, because we can take a good thing and twist it and make it really bad. That's what idolatry is. We're going to be exhausted, frustrated, depressed. Stick with the analogy. We're going to be very hungry. Now, I've been in church a long time. I know that churches are full of depressed, hungry, ready to quit, because we're still struggling to fill ourselves on stuff other than Christ. The easy picture, and don't miss this. This is coming right after dealing with following after the teachings of men. The easiest thing to fill ourselves with is wearing a blue shirt, wearing a white shirt, wearing a tie, doing it right, combing it to the right, combing it to the left, doing the things. It's coming right after that. It's very easy for us to find other things. But then the big question again is, when we wake up in the morning, are we prayerful? Are we thankful? When we run into struggles, it's how much of our life do we actually depend on, share with Jesus? Usually, you know what it takes for us to share any time for us to become at all dependent? It takes trauma in our life. You have to take the control away from us before we realize we never had any control and go to the one who's always had control. So, question. If we know that our real hunger is supposed to be fed only by Jesus, why do we try to keep feeding on junk food? Now, this brings us into the next portion of the passage. Chapter 8, verse 15. Actually, let's pick it up in verse 11. I'm trying to hurry. Don't give me other analogies. Verse 11. Now this is verse 10, after the feeding of the 4,000, and straightway he entered into a ship with his disciples and came into the parts of Dalmanthia. Okay, he sent them away in verse 9, and he departs in a ship, just like in feeding of 5,000. He sent them away. Well, now in feeding of 5,000, he goes to pray and he sends the disciples away. Verse 11, and the Pharisees came forth, soon as it's done, and the Pharisees came forth and began to question with him, seeking of him a sign from heaven, tempting him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit. Now this is we're not going to take time, but this is a great picture right here. He sighed deeply in his spirit. This is a picture of, this is not, and I listen to a lot, Kevin, I listen to a lot of people, and you know what they do? They make Jesus like them instead of them being like Jesus. Yeah. And so they get this picture right here, and he sighed deeply, and he's so frustrated, and he's angry with them, and no, you know what he is? He's brokenhearted. He's, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how oft would I have? Okay, after everything you've seen, after all that I've done, and here you are again, and there's no belief, and there's no, it was just the feeding of the 4,000, and you've seen the leper, and you've seen, 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 and you can go to Isaiah, and you can see what you're supposed to see is what you've seen, but yet you say, show me a sign. The fight is you just don't want to believe. And when all that he wants is to redeem, he came to redeem. He came that we might believe and that we might have life and that life be eternal. And that's what he wants to accomplish. And now he's faced one more time. Faced after all. This is not anger and frustration. That's how we would be. This is love and compassion and brokenhearted. This is the same compassion that looked out on the 4,000 and said, I have compassion on them because they haven't eaten. 3 days they followed me and they haven't eaten. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and saith, why doth this generation seek after a sign? Verily I say unto you, there shall no sign be given unto this generation. And he left them and entered into the ship and again departed to the other side. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread. Neither had they in the ship with them more than one loaf. And he charged them, saying, take heed. Okay, so after that, Brother Ivy, they're leaving. Gives us this little picture. There's no food in the boat. Jesus hears them talking, and he gives them this. And he charged them, saying, take heed. This is his warning to them. His warning to those who are following him, to those who are his friends, to those he's befriended. Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod. Now, let me tell you, those are two really bad guys. He's talking to his friends right here, and he says, be careful that you're not like Herod, the one who killed John the Baptist, who beheaded him, who lifted his head around on a charger for all to see. Don't be like him. Brother Wayne, don't be like Herod. I almost want to get offended. Now, I've seen him calm the storm, so I don't know I'm going to say anything. But don't be like Herod. Don't be like the Pharisees. They're back there throwing darts at you. They're planning to kill you. We're in the boat with you. I'm like, come on, that sounds good from up there. No, that's who we are. Okay, he's speaking to them, but he's speaking to Brother Mike Frazier and Brother Jeremy Lorgan. He's saying, you and I need to be careful lest we fall prey to the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. The leaven of the Pharisees. Well, it's an easy picture. What's the problem with the Pharisees? The Pharisees don't believe who he is. Herod does not believe he's king. By the way, this is an easy answer too. Why doesn't Herod believe he's king? Because if Herod believed he's king, guess who's not king? If the Pharisees believe he's the Messiah, this whole system they built that makes them important is gone. You know what it takes to believe in him? Everything. We die to self, we live to him. I surrender all. I surrender all. I surrender all. Be careful that you don't fall prey to the leaven of Herod or the leaven of the Pharisees. We're supposed to be those who surrender all. Oh, wait a minute. The apostles are supposed to be those who surrender all. Just what is leaven? Well, here you go. Leaven is fungus. Leaven is yeast. Leaven goes in, eats up the proteins and the sugars, has a discharge. That's the gas that makes your dough rise, that flavors it. Completely changes the dough. And in Bible times, that was seen as corrupting. Now today, we like leavened bread. In fact, we have sourdough bread, and big thing on the internet these days is women teaching you how to make your own yeast and keep your yeast going and feed it, and it looks gross. Tastes good, Katie, though. It tastes good. Keep doing it. Looks atrocious. Easy to picture, corrupt. Now in our time, modern time, we don't really talk about yeast, but the perfect picture to talk about this destructive picture is cancer. So if we were modernizing this, it would be he's saying to them, because that's what cancer does. It comes in, it changes the cells, it changes the tissue, it makes it something else. It now attacks what's good and tears it down. And just yeast goes in and it chews up what's there and it tears it down and it produces something else. And so what he's saying is he's giving them the warning. Here's the warning. Brother Mike, the warning is to Brother Mike Fraser and Brother Jeremy Lorgan. Warning, be careful that you don't get stage 4 cancer, because that's where they're at. Now that's a pretty strong warning. He's warning them that they don't get placed in this picture of unbelief. Now, I'm going to tell you, right? I go through this and I spend some time. Remember, these are cold notes. But when these were hot notes, all I could think is that these are his friends. These are those who gave up. These are dreams and hopes, and they're following him. And I want to argue on their behalf. And you know why I want to argue on their behalf? Because I'm really arguing on my behalf. I'm arguing why I'm okay the way that I am with the amount of belief that I have now, so I can stay the same. But you don't stay the same because cancer grows. And leaven doesn't stop eating or giving off discharge. Right. Beware that you don't fall prey and end up with stage 4 cancer. So, but again, when I do this argument, this is what happens. I love to argue. But when it comes down arguing here, there's usually just a slam the door. Which, by the way, that's what it's like listening to Brother Ray over there. He just slams the door and slams the door. There is no arguing. So I try to argue. But what happens is when you begin to argue with this picture to kind of justify your limitations, well, don't you realize in the Bible, things aren't broken up by levels. Okay, there's holy or unholy. There's your levels. And anything over here, anything done in the flesh, anything done without Christ, anything, okay, that would be in this unholy area. We are to be the in Christ. That's how we live. That's who we are. That's what we do. That's my motivation. That's my response. But that's walking in the Spirit. Remember, there are 3 in 1. It's the same. When we obey the Spirit, we're obeying Christ. Ephesians tells us, he's in our heart. But when I do it over here, it's sin. Be careful. Now, I start to, why, if I know that real hunger is only fed by Jesus, why do I want to keep feeding on junk food? Well, that's where we get in here. I want to because there's something inside of me, Brother Wayne, that just doesn't want to surrender all. Brother Mike, Herod is a good illustration because if he surrendered all, he'd no longer be king. The Pharisees are a good illustration because if they surrendered all, their entire life would be changed. If I surrender all, I'm no longer king. I don't have so many decisions. I just have responses. Obedient or disobedient. I become dependent. What he tells them in verse 11 is, you seek for a sign, but you don't need a sign. You seek, I need more proof. I need more evidence. We do not need more proof or more evidence. What we need is more faith. That shows itself in us being more dependent. Every day, in everything. The apostles, they leave. Verse 16 through 20. Well, we read it, verse 16 through 20. They forgot to take bread, verse 16, and they reasoned among themselves, saying, it is because we have no bread. And when Jesus knew it, he saith unto them, why reason ye because ye have no bread? He gave them the warning. They heard the warning. Don't be like Herod. Don't be like the Pharisees. I try. I know I'm like them, but somehow there's a generational gap here. I don't get this. Yeah, he's only talking to us because we didn't bring any bread. This is the only thing I get. We can rationalize away any amount of conviction. We can put up a wall and a shield to any type of scripture. Yeah, he only said that because we have no bread. I'm not like Herod. I'm not like the Pharisees. I'll never be there. Why reason ye because ye have no bread? Perceive ye not yet? Don't you understand yet? All the times, all the things, all the signs, all the teaching, all the miracles, not yet. Neither understand. Have ye your heart yet hardened? Which, by the way, is the same conversation that happens after the feeding of the 5,000. And you know how we harden our heart? We don't believe. Having eyes, you see not. Having ears, hear ye not. And do ye not remember? Remember what? Remember when I broke the 5 loaves among 5,000? How many baskets full of fragments took ye up? But they say unto him 12. Yeah, we remember. Got it right. Give me the test. I'll score well on the test. He's not talking about the test. He's talking about the surrender, the faith, the belief. And when the 7 among 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? And they said 7. And he said unto them, how is it that ye do not understand? How is it that we do not understand? Oh, now I got a tough spot. Because there ain't no way I'm finishing the next one in 15 minutes. And I hurried through this one. We don't understand. Although we see not. Although we hear not. It's a great illustration. I've heard it used lots of times. I looked it up, wanted to make sure it was true. You can look it up. You'll find out it's true. But when Patton moved his army into Buchenwald, and I think the name of the city was Orloff, but it was Buchenwald concentration camp. It was the first time that the American army had seen the atrocities of a concentration camp. And they sent for Eisenhower. And Eisenhower came to inspect it. so that there could be a review given at the top level. And as soon as Eisenhower left, Patton went into the city. And he got out all of the inhabitants of that city to start digging graves for the bodies that were there. And they worked all day, just burying the bodies of the remains that they could find. Forced them to see it. They didn't finish it in one day. So when they sent the trucks out the next day to go get them, what they found is that the mayor and the mayor's wife of that city had committed suicide. Now, if you look this up, you'll find some say that they hung themselves, some say that they shot themselves, but they committed suicide. And they did leave a note, which basically says, we knew. Explains how they knew. We knew. The soldiers came in, they talked, but we didn't know. We knew, but we didn't know. It hadn't become real to them. Now, Ray, remember where all this starts? This starts with a real live interaction with Jesus. And it changed everything for the 4,000. They just wanted more. They knew, but they didn't know. They had other things that they were worrying about in their life. I'm not talking about salvation. I'm talking about what do we depend on to live on Monday and Tuesday. Now, I will freely say this. But Kevin, I didn't exaggerate, the picture of Sunday school in my life at all. I mean, that truly is it. When you have two of them, whoof. When you have Sunday morning and Sunday night, man, I'm a basket case that whole week. I should pay work back. But I am so thankful for that. I'm thankful for that because somewhere about 5 o'clock in the morning on Sunday morning, there is just a real relationship. There's a real revelation. And that's what I can't wait to share. I don't have words, and I don't have a picture on a paper, and I don't have a nice, pretty outline. You all know that. All I want you to do is see Jesus. Because we can so fill our souls with something short of that. And whenever that happens, we know, but we don't know. We hear, but we don't hear. There is a great danger of living that way, which is why he warns those that he loves. Beware, lest you fall prey to the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Now, that brings us up to this next passage. We're going to read it, and I'll probably end about 5 minutes short because I don't really want to jump in it too much. But there is a curious thing. But here's this flyover picture. Okay, if I read this whole chapter one time, I will tell you the first thing that's going to pop out to me is the most important thing in this whole chapter is, who do you say that I am? But stuck right before that is this little miracle that seems to not make a whole lot of sense. And that's where I want to spend some time, because it's there for a reason. And I think if you take the fly-by Mark speed view, this little miracle is kind of the key to the chapter. All right, so let's just go ahead and pick up and read it. Verse 22. And he cometh to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man unto him, and besought him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand. This is a unique miracle. It's unique for two reasons. One, this is the only place it shows up. And it's usually, Mark doesn't give us very many individual, usually those things we're going to find in Luke or we're going to find in Matthew. Okay, the only place it shows up is right here. And it is the only miracle like this. Like what? Well, it's the only miracle that looks like Jesus had to do it twice. Lots of people like to come here and say that's because the man didn't have enough faith. But none of the other miracles had anything to do with the faith. It had all to do with his power. And this one does too. And he wasn't lacking in power to make this happen. Okay, everything he does, let me see. what do we've seen him heal by word, we've seen him heal by silence, we've seen him heal by touching, we've seen him heal with mud, we see him heal with spit, we've seen him heal not even close, far off, we've seen him heal by thought. Okay, he can heal. We've seen him heal creation and stop a hurricane. Okay, he's not lacking power. So the point is, the details are for us. That makes this a very curious thing stuck in right here. Okay, if we're looking at this whole picture, and I don't waver from this at all. Not one little bit. Okay? From the beginning, chapter 1, the whole book so far has been about who am I? We're about to get this place. Who am I? Thou art the Christ. But right before that, you get this. And it doesn't seem to fit unless you do a flyby and look at the entire chapter. Because if you look at the entire chapter, here's what you have. The disciples still don't believe. They're struggling with belief. The Pharisees don't believe. The people with belief. And now here you're going to have this picture of this man who is blind. It is a picture, this entire chapter just opens up when you start looking at the idea that without heavenly revelation, man struggles with spiritual blindness. Now, what does it tell us in Matthew, even about Peter's great confession, thou art the Christ? How does he answer? No man, no flesh and blood, you didn't figure this out on your own. This is a revelation from heaven. Yeah. You know what that does? That makes us dependent. Yeah. That changes how we live life. It's not just a little thing stuck in there. This is everything. This is the key of this chapter. And he cometh to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man unto him, and besought him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand, and let him out of the town. Again, he's taking him away. This is a little different. Not done in front of everybody. And he led him out of the town, and when he spit on his eyes, and he put his hands upon him, he asked him if he saw aught. How you doing? What are you seeing? You know what usually happens right now? Now go and do something. I've healed you, go and do. Not go and do. How are things? What do you see? And he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. Well, that's no good. You'd be cutting down people and talking to big wooden things. And after that, he put his hands again upon his eyes and made him look up. And he was restored and saw every man clearly. And he sent him away to his own house, saying, neither go into the town, nor tell it to any in the town. And Jesus went out and his disciples into the towns of Caesarea Philippi. And by the way, he asked his disciples, saying unto them, whom do men say that I am? And here you go. Whom do men say that I am? And they answered, John the Baptist. That's pretty good company right there. You're one of the greats. Greatest born of woman. But some say, Elias, the caller down of fire. And others, one of the prophets. They look highly on you. But he saith unto them, but whom say ye that I am? And Peter answereth. Changes everything. Thou art the Christ. And he charged them that they should tell no man of him. Now, this is where we're going to pick it up next week. Which, by the way, puts down a real look at that verse back another week. Our challenge in how we live our own life and how we interact with others is the fact that we are spiritually blind. Well, this is an easy picture. Oh yeah, those who are unsaved are spiritually blind. The apostles still didn't get it. They start in verse 1 in the beginning. You still don't get it? You still hardened your heart? Now by the time here, he gets it. It's revealed. You would think that's it. But there's something we can't miss. We can't miss. I'll throw this out too. Just think about this. It's the only miracle that happens in stages. It doesn't happen like that. Remember, I just give you, maybe our spiritual blindness happens in stages. Doesn't happen like that. But we expect it to happen like that. That causes us lots of other problems. That doesn't make us daily dependent either. Anyway, Young Ray, will you close in a word of prayer this morning?